like to do is invite all of our speakers up front. I'm going to actually mute the video so nobody gets blinded up here. But if we could have all of our speakers up at the front. What I would love from everybody is questions. I want you to reflect on what we've been talking about today. If there's something specific to a speaker and what they shared that you would like to know more about, that's perfectly fine. If it's just a generalized question about resilience or failure or feelings or emotions or anything like that, that's fine too. So I think we're in a small enough room that you can probably just stand up and project your question instead of having to like come up, talk on the microphone and all that sort of stuff. But remember, this is also part of the debriefing process, right? And so what do we do in honors? We learn by doing and reflecting. And so this is the reflection piece, and so I am expecting questions from everybody, and we don't want to just sit here in silence for an extended amount of time. So the more questions you all ask, the faster this time will go. Okay? Excellent. Question in the back.
Do I stand up?
Please.
So whenever y'all failed, did you feel like a sense of, I guess, like imposter syndrome within, like, I don't know, having a hard time like acknowledging your accomplishments after the fact that you failed?
Did everybody hear that question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So anybody who...
Yes. Still do.
Yeah.
Yep. It's hard not to beat yourself up and replay things and what you would have done differently or how you could do it again. But as I said, it's part of that learning experience, because sometimes you can do things differently. But again, it doesn't mean you're a failure. So take the learning experience from it.
I think one of the things that I'm still learning and reminded of periodically is that that feeling doesn't go away. There's a saying, it doesn't get easier, you just get stronger. And I think that there's a real element of that where when you're, quote unquote successful and you keep going through the process, you might be getting stronger. That doesn't mean that suddenly one day you wake up and you never have a failure again, or you don't wake up some morning and say, my God, what am I doing here? Like, am I really capable of doing this? Those moments happen, at least for me, they haven't stopped yet. So
Right.
I don't know that they ever stop.
Yeah. Were you going to say something?
No, there's that moment where the sky is falling, you're terrified and questioning everything you've done, but then maybe coming back to some of what Malcolm, there's the moment where you say, well, I'm going to just kick this thing's butt. You can't, at a certain moment you use it, or at least I did, use the defeat, so to speak, as a way of rerouting how I was going to get to the place I wanted to go. And that still takes a lot of work and effort. If there's a stumbling block, how do I reorganize in such a way to overcome it? If I can't overcome it, how do I get around it? But more importantly, how do I not let it limit me? Some of that means just learning what it was about the situation that I didn't understand going into it that caused me not to be successful, and then seek out the next path.
I remember the first time I heard the term imposter syndrome. It was probably like 25 years ago. So I was like, oh my gosh, that is me. Like, that is so me. And I mean, it doesn't go away. But you learn to sort of let that voice kind of just be there a little bit in the background and do it anyway.
Yeah. Kind of fake it till you make it, right? But the important thing, I think, is that if we learn nothing else from today, that failure is not an ending, it's a beginning. And it's a chance to start again. And if we reframe that, that also helps with that voice that's in your head about imposter syndrome and you don't belong here and you're not worthy. Just knowing that everybody is going through that. I saw other hands. Yes?
So, many of my failures in the past, years on, I've realized that it was a failure. Like, maybe not in the moment, I didn't see it, I didn't realize it was a failure, but then years on, I realized, oh, that was a huge mistake I made. So, has failing made you guys better at seeing the failures coming and acting to avert them?
Sometimes.
And do you have any advice on like how you can improve at that in general? It might be kind of hard to answer that, but
What I see is, I don't think I can ever be prepared for the failure, but one of the things I've learned to do is how do I deal with failure differently? How do I cope with it? You know, whether it's through, you know, friends, family, prayer. One of the things that I've learned, and she asked about imposter syndrome too, is one thing I try not to lose sight of is knowing my worth. And I have to come to terms sometimes, is a failure something I truly had control of? Is there something I could have done differently? Or sometimes it's just wasn't meant to be, you know, that opportunity or whatever it was for me. So just understanding my worth and learning what I can from the failure. But the more I fail, I think the better I have learned to cope with failure.
There's some wisdom that comes with it. I mean, I think when you sort of, and I think it's when you fail and then you sort of, if you reflect on it, I think that.
I think your instincts get better.
Yeah.
You know, you can't always place your finger on it.
But you know yourself better, you know your capabilities better.
Yeah, two terms come to mind for me when I think about that question. I think it relates to what my colleagues shared. Introspection and circumspect. Because introspection is you thought about it. You said, okay, I remember, and the next step to that is circumspect. So if something happens so close to that again, I need to respond, I may respond differently. So it's good to be introspective and reflect. It's really healthy. What's equally important, and dare I say the next step in the process, is to circumspect, to say, okay, if something ever comes up similar to this, I know what to do differently. And I think most of the time, we spend the majority of our time in introspection and not as much time being circumspect. And I think those are equally important in terms of what you're talking about when you look back. You know, I blew that. Okay, that's good. Good reflection, good introspect. If that happens again or something similar, what do I call on to help me respond differently so that I don't have that experience again?
thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
So I know you mentioned that cortisol is part of sort of the response that you get when you fail. Given that you have that fight or flight reaction to failure, how can you decide, and I'm sure it's not clear all the time, how do you decide in the moment whether something's worth pushing and pushing? But I know you mentioned taking your exam over and over again to how do you know whether it's a point to keep pushing or it's a time to pivot? How do you make a decision?
Yeah, and for me, it's really what's important. And you know, sometimes it's where I am in life, what's important to me. Is it worth it? Is it worth fighting for? Is it worth retrying? Like that professional certification was important to me. There are other things I felt that were important to me as well. So sometimes, you know, you just kind of know, just because you decide not to go back and revisit or fight for it, doesn't mean you've necessarily failed. Maybe it just means, like when I gave the example, I want to be a pharmacist. But as I started to take more and more classes, nothing wrong if you want to be a pharmacist or you want to be in the medical profession. But for me personally, when I started exploring other things, I found that that was more of an interest for me, and I got more satisfaction, and it aligned more with what I really felt like I wanted to do. So again, you just have to evaluate what's important to you because it may be different to other people, and what's worth fighting for or revisiting.
Any other reflections on that question?
The only thing I would add is, I think if you identify something that you really want and you're struggling with, to the point that Malcolm was making, like thinking about it through the lens of why was it hard and what can you do differently? So figuring out how can you change the circumstances around it that are within your control to try to maximize the chance of success. I mean, if you just try doing the same thing over and over and over again, sometimes that'll work, but you know, a lot of times that's a recipe for repeated failure. And so sitting back and thinking, well, geez, you know, why was that hard? You know, in my case, the semester was too short, or the workload was too much, or you know, whatever. I think finding those things and saying, what within that set of circumstances can I change? And use that as a way so that you, if you're going to try it again, you can do it from a source of, better likelihood of success.
Getting comfortable with failure too. I mean, one of the things that I really like about the design process, for example, and this is true of the scientific process as well, is that all of your experience is built on failure, right? I mean, everything you're doing is a test to seek out something that's clearer, maybe not necessarily the final answer or the truth, but it's closer to the ideal, right? And so getting accustomed with putting out ideas that are, and that's often a vulnerable place to be, but being accustomed to let them fail because they're not quite 100%, and then figuring out what was missing. One way of thinking about it is that, for example, I'm not the smartest person on the block, but I know I've learned over time to know where my limitations and my strengths are. I know a little bit about my worth, but I also know where I can contribute and where I can borrow from other folks. And then beginning to find those resources when I feel like in order to be successful, I'm going to need help, and being willing to ask for it. That's not a failure, to ask for help, or to align yourself with someone who might have a similar set of opinions with a different skill set, right? So it's a question beginning to create the circumstances that allow you to be successful in a different way. So I think that would be the one I would add to it.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to say out loud, doing it on your own does not mean doing it by yourself. I'm going to say that again. Doing it on your own does not mean doing it by yourself. I know a lot of you are here and you're so excited to be an adult and make decisions and do it on your own, but there are a tremendous amount of resources on this campus, both in people and in other means, that can help you be more efficient and more effective. But reaching out to those people does not mean you didn't do it by yourself. It meant you were smart enough to do it more efficiently and more effective. So doing it on your own does not mean doing it alone. So I just want to really hammer that home. Okay, other questions? Yes.
In regards to all of your careers in the workforce today, what would be your biggest piece of advice as far as reaching those levels of authority and overall leadership within you guys' specific careers and specializations, if that makes sense? Did you raise that?
Yeah, so I would say, okay, so as a first generation college student, I would say that I think one thing that I did was try to look for the next thing, because I didn't really have I didn't have the whole career charted. I mean, I didn't know what a provost was when I was sitting in your role either, okay? So I wouldn't have known to even think about being a provost, right? Or a dean, or a professor, really, or, So I think that for me, that getting to where I am right now has just meant saying yes to many things along the way, many opportunities along the way, and no to other things, but kind of knowing myself and saying yes. But it's not been saying yes to like a 20-year plan or a 30-year plan. It's been saying yes to the next thing, figuring out the next best thing to do.
I would say something similar. I didn't think I was going to be a university professor. I thought I was going to be an architect. And when I got to college, I didn't think I was going to be an architect. I thought I was just going to do something in the world that got me out of digging trenches, right? I wanted to get away from manual labor. And I never really looked more than a few years down the road. College was a 4-year thing. At first, it was a 2-year thing because I was going to transfer. So finding those opportunities that lead you to things that allow you to get an interesting experience and maybe ideally lead you closer to something you're excited about, and you'll find your way. I never thought of it as looking for authority. That's the other piece. I wouldn't get into it for that kind of accolade, right, or that kind of recognition. I think most of you are here because you're interested in doing something positive in the world. If you can stay true to that, you're going to wind up in a position where people come to you because you have developed a reputation. You have developed some experience and expertise that other people value. And coming back to this imposter syndrome question that kicked us all off, most of us in this room are going to be our worst self-critics. None of us are going to think we're prepared enough to be the authority in the room, and it won't come through seeking authority. It will come through demonstrating your abilities and committing to a project that you believe in. And then people will come to you and eventually put you in positions to be successful because they want to see you succeed, but it's because they believe in what you believe in.
For me, I said this before, do what you love, and do the best at whatever you do, no matter how large or small the job appears to be. You saw in my career, I took a lot of lateral moves also. Learn as much as you can, but again, do things that you enjoy. Sometimes you won't enjoy every aspect of the job. But I will say this, just because you're a leader, it doesn't mean you have to have a fancy position. You can influence without authority. You can be a leader by the way you carry yourself, by the way you represent yourself, by the way you treat other people, you motivate, encourage other people. There's so many things you can do in a job without a fancy title. You can be on committees, you can mentor people. There are just so many things you can do that you can influence people and lead them without having a fancy title or senior level position. I'll tell you, when I got demoted and I was no longer a director, they didn't change my salary. And when I told my husband, he was like, "Did they take your salary away?" I was like, "No." He's like, "Okay, we're good." He's like, "You're still my wife. It's not impacting our livelihood. You're still my wife. You're still a mom. Don't, hold your head up. Don't worry about the title, because the title doesn't make you could mean one thing at one place. When I was 29, 30, and I was a VP at the bank, and 2 years later I went to another company. I didn't have a title, and I made a whole lot more money, and I love my job. And it's not even about the money, but what I'm trying to say here is, don't get so caught up in being authoritative or a fancy title versus doing work that's meaningful and impactful for you, and just being the best you can be, and treating people with respect and empathy. They'll respect you as a leader far greater than if you had a fancy title.
So I totally agree with that. The only thing I would add in the private sector world from my experiences is one of the things that really leads to success is just having intellectual curiosity. So obviously you're all intellectually curious because you're here. But when you go off into the corporate world, if that's the path that you go down, intellectual curiosity is not always rewarded on the surface. But I think that if you have a genuine curiosity about what does the business do, how do we make money, what are the things that our customers care about, that eventually will pay dividends, and it makes you more valuable to the business because you understand how it works. So I think the best thing that you can do is just not lose that sense of curiosity and wonder and kind of exploration. There's a lot of people in the corporate world that'll not ask a question because they think everybody knows the answer and they'll sound dumb. Most people don't know the answer, so being willing to answer or ask questions that other people aren't willing to ask and learn more will pay huge dividends in terms of just being able to have a good career trajectory.
So I'll just echo my colleagues' sentiments by channeling my mom. Those who know me well know I love to talk about family. One of my mom's many sayings was that you don't need a title to do well by people and right by people. You don't need a title. In fact, sometimes a title can keep you from doing that. And I take that to heart because I know there are opportunities. And don't get me wrong, titles are cool now. I mean, it's cool to be a provost or post dean. I mean, titles are cool. But the titles are really for other people. It's not for you. And so you can be in a position where someone will respect the title. What's more important is that they respect you, the person. And that takes time. Trust takes time, takes this establishing and developing relationships. And so if the title is important to you, I'm not saying don't go for it, but don't let that be the driver for what you want to do in your life, because it's much more important for you because you've been fortunate to be in this situation to pay it forward, to really do right and do good for people. And the title can afford you opportunities to do that. Just know why you're doing it. Because if you get the title and you haven't thought about the motivation for the title is just to get the title, that's kind of hollow, what we call a paper champion. It's kind of hollow at the end of the day, because someone will say, well, you got the title, but you treat people horribly. I would much rather not have the title and do right by people than the other way around. And so you just have to be cognizant of what is, again, your motivation for doing that work. And if it necessitates your having some title to do it, there's nothing wrong with that. Just make sure you know why you're motivated, and it really should be you're in a position that you can really affect and have an impact on people's lives, on products, our quality of life. That should be a driving force that's going to be much more fulfilling for you if you have the title as well. So don't do away with the title. Just don't make the title the place where you're working to be in a position of authority, because people may respect the title. You also want them to respect you too.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
As someone who's failed a lot, I would just answer to what's been said, that listen to others, because they may see things in you that you will not see in yourself. I'm at UNC Charlotte because someone told me that I had the skills to do a specific job without moving through all of the ranks. So,
Yes.
I actually wanted to follow up on that question. Several of you have talked about sort of, one thing that came up was knowing and understanding your value. Also, several of you have alluded to like what you can control and what you can't. But I'm wondering what your advice is for when many of the the students in this room have or will come across systems that are set up. Is that something that we would consider out of their control and they have to figure a way around it, or what? If there are, somebody mentioned glass ceilings, things like that. When there is only a certain place that you can get to based on how the system is set up. So what advice for you would you have for our next generation to address that in terms of how they're impacted by failure?
I'll give my part first and let my colleagues chime in. My son, he's trying to square a lot of things as he has entered the workforce. And there are some things at his company that just don't work for him. And one of the things he remembers us talking about is there will be times in life where you will do everything right. You will do everything right and still be wrong. And he was a little boy when I told him that. I said, Tom, there are going to be times, dude, you're going to do everything you're supposed to do and you're still going to be wrong. And he's feeling some of that now. I don't have an easy answer for that, but I can tell you he's trying to square that right now on his job, where there are things that are happening and he says, that can't be the way we do business. And then he adds, but it's a business. They have shareholders. So, okay. So he's trying to square that even now as a young adult. His motivation, though, not to learn, he says, I work to live. I don't live to work. I work to live. I don't live to work. I love my job. I love what I do. But I know the job is the means to some other things in my life. And that job is setting me up to do some of these other things. I need to put value on those as well. Again, that's his squaring what we call productive struggle in education. He's engaging in these intellectual gymnastics with his parents and with himself and with his young friends at his company about how do they square those things. But for him, the kind of job he has, 5 o'clock, he's like, I'm going to volunteer, I'm going to do beach cleanup, I'm going to do all these other things because those are equally important to me and they're value to the company as well. That to me is his processing it, and I like to see how that act is going to play out for him, and obviously vicariously for me as well.
And so for me, being a black female, I'll offer a different perspective, or a female in general. So when I completed my master's, my capstone was on how workplace discrimination impacts the health and well-being. It was going to be of women, but I had to narrow it down. So I did for black women, but I think this holds true for a lot of people, whether you're a woman, whether you're black, whether you're maybe someone that may face some systemic types of things. And that's where I got the whole dopamine, serotonin, the stressors. But one of the things I'll just say is cultural diversity, equity, and inclusion are very, very important. They're very important to me. because I think all people should be able to represent themselves equally in the workplace, but we know that's not always the case due to, you know, just systematic things, historical things that have happened in this world, and we all have our own unconscious biases and intentional biases too. But I think that it's important, as I said, to know your worth, to engage, as you mentioned, in activities. So one of the things that's helped me, you know, working for organizations that invest in employee resource groups or business resource groups, BRGs, ERGs, is very important because it shows they've made a huge investment. One of the things for me as being the talent lead for the Black BRG is that, you know, I get an opportunity and kind of an escape from my day-to-day job, my yay job is to be part of that and to interact with people with a similar affinity or that are allies for that affinity, where we can also work on how we can help the organization improve and, you know, really break down some of those barriers and ensure that it's an equitable environment where everyone feels welcome and represented and is given a fair chance. So anytime, as you mentioned, you can engage yourself in things outside of work or even within the job, that's always a bonus. But we do need to be aware that some of those inequities do still exist. They're not right, but that's the reality of the world that we live in. And I think just knowing that that awareness is there. Now you can't represent yourself like, is it this? You know, you just can't go in like, you know, you have to deal, you know, especially in the corporate world, there is a game that has to be somewhat played. It doesn't mean that you're not being authentic to who you are, but you just need to understand what battles to, you know, fight. You know, personally, I mentioned that I applied for several jobs and, you know, I was overlooked. There were one or two where I knew I was the most qualified person. And I felt like I was overlooked because they hired their friend or the person they bought from the other company. And that made me feel some kind of way, but it didn't make me give up. And if you get to a point where you don't feel like, I'm not a quitter, but that culture is the right culture for you, I think I mentioned one in particular, then sometimes, you know, find the place that does feel right for you. I'm at an age now where 10 years I'm out, or less. Joby and I just had that conversation. I'm out, I'm retiring. I know I don't look like it. But anyway, with all that said, I'm at a point in my life where, like you said, I don't live to work, I work to live. And, you know, I want to be able to provide and do things that, you know, where I can retire and provide for my family. But at the same time, I want to go to work every day where I feel like I'm in an environment where I am valued for who I am authentically. And if I ever feel like that, then I'll probably, and I don't feel like there's something being done to improve that, then I'm just going to find, you know, somewhere else where I do feel like I'm valued. I don't want to be somewhere where I don't feel like they want me to be there anymore. And I'm just at a point in my life where, you know, I feel like I can make that decision. Now don't go quit your jobs. Just look at doing things differently, but, you know, Lowe's.com/careers.
Awesome. Really quick, because I'm looking at my watch now, and we're almost at 4:30. So I'd love that there are still questions. So if you have a question that you weren't able to ask, email it to me, and I can pass it out to the whole entire panel, and then we can share this as part of what's going to be in the UHP module that this will create as a result of this. But what I do want to do first and foremost is say thank you again to our wonderful panelists and speakers, and thank you for sharing. And I know that what you brought to the table today is going to be very valuable for all of our students, so thank you very much. For those of you who are here needing the code,